I woke up to the sound of a blender, outside, in my cornfield. At first, I thought I was dreaming, or that maybe the raccoons had finally evolved past stealing eggs and were now whipping up breakfast smoothies. But when I looked out the window and saw a sea of nylon tents, foldable lounge chairs, and someone in yoga pants doing warrior pose atop my hay bales, I knew this was no dream. This was a full-blown invasion. A handmade banner flapped in the wind, reading, HOA Wellness Weekend Retreat, and I swear I saw a man in a sequined robe instructing a meditation circle like he was leading a cult. I hadn't rented out my land, hadn't given permission, hadn't even been asked. And yet here they were, singing kumbaya, sipping mimosas, and defiling my property like it was Coachella for entitled suburbanites. I didn't know it yet, but that morning was going to kick off one of the most absurd, dramatic, and ridiculous weeks of my life. Because the HOA had declared war on my farm, and they had no idea who they were messing with. I threw on my boots, skipped coffee, and stormed out the door with my dog Duke trailing behind. Tail wagging like this was just another regular chore. I marched past my barn and down the gravel path toward the field, where the crowd of campers looked like they'd been dropped straight from the pages of a bougie outdoor catalog. There were pop-up canopies, inflatable loungers, someone with a drone, and even a portable espresso bar plugged into a stolen extension cord that I traced back to one of my irrigation outlets. It was 7:14 a.m., and I was already at the edge of full-blown rage. As I approached, a woman in a salmon-colored pantsuit intercepted me like a bouncer at a nightclub. "Hi there," she chirped. "We're just getting set up for the morning sound bath. If you'd like to participate, we have spare mats." I blinked. "This is my land." She tilted her head, clearly not computing. "Oh, you're the neighbor?" "No. I own this field. That barn. That tractor. That cow over there staring at you like you're made of alfalfa. All mine." There was a moment of confusion, followed by a performative gasp. "Oh. Well, this is awkward. We were told by Rick that this land was fine for camping." "You know Rick?" "HOA liaison. Rick doesn't exist." She frowned as if I'd insulted a close family member. "Well, Rick booked it for the weekend. I'll go get Karenita. She's our president." Of course. There's always a Karen. And this one had apparently upgraded to a full-on Latinized version, Karenita, which sounded less like a name and more like a brand of wine cooler. A few minutes later, a woman in oversized sunglasses and a glittery sun visor appeared, flanked by two clipboard-wielding minions and sipping cucumber water like she was overseeing a corporate merger. "You must be the groundskeeper? Owner. And what the hell are you doing on my property?" She smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they're about to say something ridiculous. "We're hosting a mental health retreat for our HOA board and select members. Rick, our social outreach coordinator, handled the logistics. We were told this field was part of the shared greenbelt." "There's no shared greenbelt. This is a working farm." "Well," she said, waving a manicured hand as if brushing away reality, "we're already set up, and the event schedule is locked. We have yoga at 8, guided journaling at 9, and the kombucha truck arrives by 10. "You brought a kombucha truck onto my land? Technically it's a mobile hydration station." I was about to argue, but just then, someone fired up an industrial speaker and started blasting pan flute music. A man in a silk kimono danced barefoot through the rows of corn. My dog Duke started barking. One of my cows looked genuinely offended. "You have 10 minutes to get off my land before I call the sheriff," I said. Karenita didn't flinch. "We've consulted our HOA bylaws and your bylaws have zero jurisdiction here." She clucked her tongue. "You don't need to be so aggressive. You should be thanking us. Our retreat brings positive energy and visibility to your property." "Visibility? Lady, this is a cornfield, not a pop-up art gallery." She gave me a dismissive shrug and turned away, barking orders into a Bluetooth headset. Her minions began setting up a crystal altar between my rows of tomatoes. I stood there for a minute, stunned. I had seen some wild things in my time. Tractor drag races, barn weddings gone sideways, that time a goat got drunk on fermented apples. But this took the cake. The HOA hadn't just wandered onto my property, they'd declared squatters' rights with granola and scented oils. I called the sheriff's office, but they were short-staffed and said someone would swing by when they could. Which, in rural terms, meant sometime between now and Christmas. I texted my neighbor June, and she replied with one sentence, "Don't you dare do anything until I get there with popcorn." For the rest of the morning, I watched in disbelief as they built an obstacle course out of hay bales, tried to meditate with the cows, and one guy mistook my beehives for a free-range honey tasting station. He got stung on the ear and blamed the aggressive energy in the pasture. I tried one last time to reason with Karenita, but she was too busy hosting a healing circle, where they wrote their HOA grievances on biodegradable paper and set them afloat in my irrigation ditch. "You're gonna regret this," I told her. "We're all about love here," she replied. "You won't be when the cows come through." She laughed, as if the idea of a cow disrupting her essential oil seminar was the punchline to some joke. But what she didn't know, and what she was going to learn the hard way, is that on this farm, the cows weren't just livestock. They were family, and family takes trespassing real personal. The next morning, I woke up to find the invasion had escalated. What had once been a chaotic but limited camp was now a fully operational HOA base of operations. Overnight, they'd strung up solar-powered fairy lights between my fence posts, planted decorative signs reading things like Peace Grove and Harmony Field, and installed a makeshift sign in booth manned by a bored teenager in a neon vest. Apparently, he was the parking compliance officer, and when I asked where his car was, he pointed toward a patch of crushed zucchini where 6 sedans were jammed in like clowns in a circus vehicle. My corn was trampled, 2 tomato plants had been relocated without permission to enhance the meditation area, and I counted at least 4 people wearing lanyards as if this was some kind of spiritual TED Talk. At the far end of the field, someone had erected a temporary arch made of pool noodles and glitter tape. Beneath it stood a man with a clipboard and a top knot, greeting guests with a 2-handed handshake and phrases like, "Welcome to your weekend of personal realignment." I was halfway through a furious stomp in his direction when I spotted Karenita again, now in a flowing paisley robe and wielding a wireless microphone like she was hosting a pageant. "Good morning, campers," she said into the mic. "Let's all take a deep breath and thank Mother Earth and Farmer Jim for allowing us this sacred space. My name's not Jim." I called out over the crowd, "My name's Dan. And you're all still trespassing." Several people clapped as if I was part of the opening ceremony. One woman near the hay bales shouted, "We love your vibe, Jim." I could feel my blood pressure rising, but instead of screaming, I just turned and walked back toward the barn. Not because I was giving up, but because I needed witnesses. By the time I got to June's place, she already had 2 lawn chairs set up and a thermos of what she called observation whiskey. She handed me a glass and pulled up a live stream on her phone. Apparently, my teenage nephew had set up a hidden camera near the cow pasture and was broadcasting everything under the title, HOA Takes the Farm. It already had 15,000 viewers. Comments ranged from, "Is this a cult?" to "Can we send in a crop duster with glitter?" "This is gonna explode," June said, sipping from her flask. "You gonna let it fizzle or fire it up?" I didn't answer right away. I watched the stream, eyes narrowing as the HOA folks tried to wrangle one of my goats into wearing a flower crown. That was when it hit me. They weren't going to leave with a simple call to the sheriff. They needed to be shown the natural order of things: cause and effect, action and consequence. And lucky for me, I had access to one of the most effective chaos agents known to man: cows. Back at the barn, I pulled out my notebook. Every farmer's got one, a beat-up spiral-bound list of projects, ideas, and schemes we jot down between feedings and fence repairs. I flipped to a blank page and wrote, "Operation Mumageddon," across the top. The plan was simple. If these people wanted to frolic in a field, let them try it when it was also occupied by 30 head of semi-curious, easily startled cattle. I wasn't going to hurt anyone, just let the cows reclaim their turf with the kind of clumsy enthusiasm only bovines could provide. First, I needed bait. I headed to the feed store and picked up 2 extra mineral blocks, a tub of molasses, and a couple salt licks shaped like apples. The cows loved those things, and I had a perfect spot near the edge of the camp where I could place them just out of sight. Second, I needed help. I called up Jimmy, a retired rodeo clown with questionable judgment but an excellent sense of timing. He owed me a favor after I pulled him out of a ditch last summer, long story involving moonshine and a runaway llama. Jimmy was thrilled. Said he'd bring his air horns and his lucky boot. The next day, while the HOA did sunrise tai chi to a pan flute remix of Sweet Caroline, I snuck along the fence line and set the bait. The cows noticed immediately. One of them, Mabel, let out a curious moo and nudged her sister Buttercup. They stared, then slowly ambled forward, eyeing the treats like kids peeking into a candy store. Meanwhile, the HOA was doubling down. Karenita had set up a town hall tent, and was taking votes on whether to expand the retreat zone into my orchard. Someone proposed adding hammocks to the pear trees. Another person suggested rebranding the entire farm as a community wellness park. They were literally trying to annex my property through yoga and committee. Later that afternoon, as I watched from a hidden vantage point behind the tool shed, Jimmy pulled up in a beat-up truck covered in bumper stickers that read things like, "Honk if you love chaos" and "Clowns know best." He climbed into the hayloft, loaded the air horns, and gave me a thumbs up. I checked my watch. We were almost ready. The final piece was timing. Every afternoon, like clockwork, Karenita hosted her HOA Harmony Hour, a combination of karaoke, group breathing, and wine spritzers. It was the loudest, most ridiculous part of the day, perfect for covering the sound of stampeding hooves. I returned to the house, made a fresh batch of popcorn, and waited. Duke lay at my feet, tail thumping in anticipation. It was almost time to let nature do what it does best, remind people who really runs the pasture. That evening, right on schedule, the first chords of a horrifically off-key version of Let It Go echoed across the field. Karenita, dressed in a glittery blue cape, sang with such emotional conviction that I nearly abandoned the plan out of sheer second-hand embarrassment. But then I saw it. The cows had started to move. Mabel took the lead, eyes locked on the molasses tub like a heat-seeking missile. Buttercup followed, then Daisy, then the whole herd. Jimmy signaled from the loft. The air horns were ready. My cows were in position. The HOA had no idea their spa day was about to turn into a stampede. By the time the sun crept over the treetops the next morning, the cows were restless. Not angry. Cows don't really get angry, but they were definitely curious. They'd been lingering near the edge of the pasture all night, eyeing the new buffet I'd placed just beyond the HOA encampment. The salt licks were already half gone, and the molasses tub had visible tongue streaks running down the side. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like livestock being lazy. To me it was clear. They were calculating. They'd seen the tents. They'd seen the lawn chairs. And Mabel, bless her bossy heart, was already sizing up the inflatable yoga dome like it was some sort of alien invader she was about to headbutt into the next county. Back at the barn, Jimmy was running a full diagnostic on the air horns, wearing earmuffs and a serious expression like this was a military operation. He'd brought 4 different horns, each one tuned to a slightly different pitch. Said the variety encouraged bovine chaos. I didn't know if that was true, but he looked like a man with experience, and his boots were already covered in cow pies, so I trusted him. Meanwhile, June had arrived with 2 folding chairs and an entire cooler of snack. She'd texted half the county, and soon a handful of curious neighbors started drifting over under the pretense of checking the irrigation lines or inspecting barn structural integrity. No one believed the HOA had any right to be there, but we were all too amused to call for backup just yet. The plan wasn't just revenge. It was education. A good old-fashioned rural reintroduction to reality for a group of people who'd spent too long in cul-de-sac echo chambers. By midday, the HOA was deep into what they called vision planning hour. Karenita stood beneath the noodle arch, now reinforced with duct tape and a dream catcher, presenting oversized whiteboards covered in dry erase marker gibberish. She spoke with the confidence of a CEO and the logic of a squirrel. "This quadrant," she said, gesturing toward my pumpkin patch, "is ripe for transformation into an outdoor sauna spa experience. Imagine cedar tubs, bamboo fencing, private eucalyptus steam stations." Someone in the back asked if we had eucalyptus trees. She answered, "We can manifest them." I was eating a sandwich behind the tractor when I saw Jimmy give me the signal, 2 quick flashes of a pocket mirror from the loft. The cows had begun to line up naturally behind the bait trail I'd laid down, their path threading neatly through the north edge of the HOA camp. Mabel was up front, her gaze locked in, tail flicking in a slow, anticipatory rhythm. Buttercup stood to her left, with Daisy and her twin calves rounding out the formation. It looked less like a herd and more like a bovine biker gang. Jimmy raised the first air horn and looked at me. I nodded. The sound ripped through the calm like a cannon blast. The HOA members froze mid-stretch, several of them clutching their mats and water bottles in confusion. Karenita's voice cut out mid-sentence as her whiteboard flipped off the easel and slapped her in the face. And then, all at once, the cows surged forward. Mabel led the charge, thundering through the grass with all the grace of a dump truck. Behind her came the others, mooing in unison, a rolling wave of hooves and hide. They weren't angry. They weren't even particularly fast. But the sight of 30 cows jogging straight toward the pop-up relaxation center sent the HOA into full-blown panic. Someone screamed. A man in linen pants tripped over a folding chair and rolled into the makeshift kombucha tent, knocking over a cooler of raspberry ginger fizz. The goat, who had been leashed to a stake near the sound bath area, broke free and started headbutting anything soft and colorful. One of the yoga instructors abandoned her station entirely and made a beeline for the treeline, arms windmilling like she was trying to take off. Karenita, ever determined to maintain control, tried to calm the crowd using her microphone. "Remain grounded," she bellowed. "We are one with the earth." But her voice cracked, and seconds later, Mabel sauntered past her, knocked over a folding table with her shoulder, and sent the PA system tumbling into a puddle. The cows, meanwhile, were having the time of their lives. Salt licks? Check. Molasses tub? Check. Decorative solar lanterns they could chew on? Bonus. Buttercup found a hammock and somehow got herself partially entangled in it, mooing contentedly as it swung from her sides. A smaller cow knocked over the hydration station and began licking a bag of ice like it was the Holy Grail. Jimmy triggered the second air horn, just for fun, and the remaining HOA members bolted. Some ran for their cars, only to find them blocked in by the very zucchini plants they'd driven over the day before. Others ran into the woods, where they would no doubt discover poison ivy and tick. One guy just lay flat on the ground with his eyes closed, whispering, "I am the grass. I am the grass." Through it all, I just stood there, arms crossed, chewing on a stalk of wheat I'd picked out of habit. I didn't feel guilt. Not even a little. These people had turned my farm into a festival without permission, ignored every warning, and treated me like I was the uninvited guest. If cows reclaiming their land sent them spiraling into existential dread, that was their problem. Eventually, the sheriff showed up, not because anyone called him, but because his wife had been watching the live stream and insisted he see it in person. He pulled up in his cruiser, stepped out, looked at the scene, and said, "Ha." Karenita approached him, covered in cow slobber, glitter, and what might have been oat milk, screaming about biological warfare and agricultural terrorism. He listened politely, took her statement, then turned to me. "You press-sin charges?" he asked. "Nope," I said. "Cows did all the work." He nodded. Fair enough. By the end of the day, the HOA was gone. The tents were flattened, the yoga mats abandoned, and the noodle arch lay twisted in the grass like a defeated inflatable octopus. The cows slowly wandered back to the pasture, content and slightly stickier than usual. Jimmy packed up his gear and gave me a salute. June handed me a cupcake. That, she said, was the most fun I've had since the Great Barn Wedding Brawl of '09. I tipped my hat, looked out over the wreckage, and felt peace return to the land. Sure, it might take a week to fix the irrigation lines, and someone would need to dig kombucha out of the carrot rows. But it was worth it. For once, chaos had been on my side. And the cows? They'd earned themselves an extra bale of hay. The aftermath looked like a farm-themed battlefield. Empty lawn chairs lay toppled in the grass, mangled yoga mats fluttered in the breeze like wounded flags, and the remnants of a kombucha keg dripped slowly into a cratered footprint left by Daisy's right hoof. Somewhere in the orchard, a single Bluetooth speaker still played soft pan flute music, a haunting soundtrack to the wreckage. The cows had dispersed back to their pasture, visibly proud of themselves. Mabel kept glancing back at the field like she was waiting for an encore. I gave her a head pat and whispered that her performance had been nothing short of award-winning. Jimmy was sitting cross-legged in the hay, sipping a soda and grinning like a man who'd just watched a Broadway show for free. June had returned with binoculars, a fresh lawn chair, and a giant tub of kettle corn. She offered some to the sheriff, who decided to stick around just long enough to make sure nobody breaks into spontaneous litigation. A few of the HOA members were still milling about, dazed and dusty, clearly trying to piece together what had just happened. It wasn't just that they'd been overrun by cows, it was the total dismantling of their self-importance. These were people used to winning arguments with policy handbooks and passive-aggressive newsletters. None of that helped when Buttercup chewed up the minutes from their last board meeting. Karenita, despite being partially soaked in a spilled smoothie and sporting a cowlick that wasn't just metaphorical, hadn't given up entirely. She stormed toward me, clipboard in hand, waving it like a sword. Behind her, 2 other board members trailed reluctantly, both holding their shoes because they'd lost them in the stampede. She stopped just short of me and pointed dramatically. "You," she said, "will be hearing from our lawyers." I stared at her for a moment, then said, "You trespassed." She flipped the clipboard around and jabbed at a paper clipped to the front. We were acting under the impression that this was unclaimed shared land. Our bylaws don't apply here. This isn't a subdivision. This is private farmland. Owned, fenced, registered, surveyed, paid for in full with 20 years of busted knuckles and pre-dawn chores. But Rick doesn't exist, I reminded her. And if he did, I'd sue him for impersonating a land fairy. She blinked at me like I'd just spoken in riddles, then shifted tactics. You could have seriously injured someone with those animals. You mean the cows you tried to feed incense and dress in silk scarves? Her lips pursed into a tight line. She turned to the sheriff. This is endangerment. Reckless conduct. I demand he be cited. The sheriff scratched his chin and gave me a slow side glance. Dan, did you release the cows? Nope. I left the gate open. They made their own decisions. He nodded, turning back to her. Ma'am, you were trespassing. If you want to press charges for being licked by livestock, you're welcome to file a report. But far as I can tell, no laws were broken. Unless you count kidnapping that goat earlier. The color drained from her face. The goat, now lounging in a kiddie pool someone had forgotten, let out a satisfied bleat as if confirming the sheriff's statement. Realizing she wasn't going to win with the sheriff, Karenita tried one last desperate swing. We'll sue for damages. Our tents, equipment, materials, all destroyed. June leaned in and muttered, You mean the stuff you set up illegally on someone else's field? The sheriff cleared his throat. Actually, ma'am, you might want to reconsider going that route. I've got footage from several angles. Live streams, security cams, drone shots. Pretty sure any court in the county would laugh this out of the building. Karenita's confidence finally wavered. Her shoulders slumped, and her clipboard lowered slightly. "We were just trying to build something beautiful," she mumbled. I almost felt bad for her, until I remembered her trying to rename my pumpkin patch, the Peaceful Rejuvenation Zone. I stepped forward and said, "Look, I get it. You wanted a place to stretch and vibe and sip fermented mushroom juice. But next time, do it on land you actually own. And leave the cows out of it." She turned and walked away without another word, flanked by her shoeless sidekicks. One of them tried to salvage a folding chair, but it collapsed the moment she touched it. The sheriff gave me a short salute, then climbed into his cruiser and drove off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the fading sound of pan flute. By evening, most of the HOA crowd had vanished. A few lingered just long enough to grab what hadn't been chewed, trampled, or swallowed. Jimmy helped me round up some of the cows who were still poking through leftover snack bins, and June took pictures of everything, already planning a scrapbook called The Great HOA Uprising. I finally got a moment to sit on my porch with Duke, a cold drink in hand, and a calm breeze washing over the land. The sun was low, casting long golden shadows across the field. The cows were back in their pasture, tails swishing peacefully, and for the first time in days, my farm was silent. Until I heard the unmistakable sound of a small engine and saw a rental truck pull into the driveway. I stood slowly as a man hopped out, clipboard in hand, nervous energy practically bouncing off him. "Hi. Delivery for Dan. Daniel Miller? It says here this is from HOA West Neighborhood Leadership and Legacy Committee?" I narrowed my eyes. "What is it?" He opened the back of the truck and revealed a large crate, clearly labeled in cursive font. "Gourmet cow treats. Grass-fed, small batch, infused with lavender." There was a note taped to the top. I peeled it off and read it. "Dear Mr. Miller, on behalf of the remaining board members, we would like to apologize for the recent misunderstanding. Please accept this peace offering. Effective immediately, Karenita has resigned. The rest of us agree. No more field retreats. Sincerely, HOA West Interim Chairwoman, Janine P." I turned to the delivery guy. "You want to help me hand out cow treats?" He shrugged. "Better than unloading crates of essential oils." We spent the next hour feeding gourmet snacks to the cows, who clearly enjoyed being pampered after their moment of glory. Mabel got two. Buttercup licked my elbow in appreciation. Even the twins got their share, though one tried to eat the delivery receipt. As the stars came out and the field finally returned to normal, I leaned against the fence and smiled. No lawsuits, no more trespassers, and a fresh round of viral videos flooding the internet. Not bad for a day that started with meditation circles and ended with a stampede. The cows had done their job. Nature had balanced itself. And the farm, my farm, was finally at peace. The days that followed were unusually quiet. Not just in the peaceful way where the wind rustles through the corn or the cows shuffle lazily to their favorite shady spot, but the kind of quiet that settles after a storm has swept through and left everyone too stunned to speak. Word of the great HOA Stampede had traveled far beyond our sleepy county. By the end of the week, local news vans showed up at the gate like pilgrims arriving at a holy site. Reporters interviewed June, who declared herself the official witness to suburban collapse, while Jimmy gave dramatic retellings from atop a hay bale, complete with reenactments and interpretive dance. My cows, meanwhile, were blissfully unaware of their internet fame. They continued their daily routines as if they hadn't just starred in a viral saga. Mabel was especially smug, nudging visitors for extra treats and posing every time someone lifted a camera. What I didn't expect, though, was how quickly the HOA tried to pretend the whole thing never happened. Their website quietly removed the annual wellness retreat section. Karenita disappeared from her post entirely, no announcement, no farewell email, just vanished like a poorly written sitcom character. In her place, a new president named Janine took over, and to her credit, She seemed determined to make things right. A few days after the lavender-infused cow treat delivery, she sent a letter in the mail, on actual paper, not HOA-branded letterhead, thanking me again for not pressing charges and formally acknowledging their comprehensive lapse in judgment. I pinned it to the bulletin board next to my feed schedule and the old photo of the llama Jimmy once accidentally let loose during the 4th of July parade. The final cleanup didn't take long. A few HOA volunteers returned under Janine's watch to help remove the last of the trampled tents and salvage whatever glitter-covered supplies could be recovered. They worked quietly, avoided eye contact, and didn't dare step near the pasture. I offered them water and left them alone. Some lessons don't need words. But the story didn't end there. A week later, I got an invitation. Not from the HOA, but from the local fair committee. They wanted to honor the cows with a special appearance in the upcoming harvest parade. Local heroes, they called them. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my hammer. But after thinking about it, I agreed, on one condition. If the cows were going to be in a parade, they were doing it in style. With help from June, Jimmy, and a few crafty 4-H kids, we built a float. Well, more like a rolling barn platform covered in hay, streamers, and a big sign that read, "Respect the Fence." Mabel and Buttercup stood proudly on the float, both wearing handmade sashes that said, "Field Freedom Fighter" and "Honorary Deputy." The twins wore glittery hats, which they tried to eat twice before we settled on cow-safe crowns made of woven grass and ribbon. We didn't rehearse anything. We just rolled down Main Street, waving, mooing, and letting the cows soak up the applause like seasoned celebrities. Jimmy walked alongside tossing wrapped cow treats into the crowd like parade candy, and June held up a cardboard sign that read, "Moo enforcement is real." People loved it. Some laughed until they cried. Others brought signs of their own. Cows 1, HOA 0, and "Don't mess with Mabel." Kids cheered. Old-timers tipped their hats. And somewhere in the back of the crowd, I spotted Janine, the new HOA president, clapping along with the rest of them. She caught my eye, gave a small nod, and I nodded back. Truce accepted. After the parade, we returned to the farm to find 3 separate news crews waiting at the gate. I wasn't interested in interviews, but Duke managed to get himself featured in a local segment after chasing his own tail near the barn while a reporter gave a monologue. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I sat on the porch and watched the cows settle down for the night. The farm was quiet again, the kind of quiet that's earned. The past week had been chaotic, absurd, and downright surreal, but it ended with everything back where it belonged. Still, I figured I ought to do something to prevent future retreats from popping up without warning. So the next morning, I built a sign. Not just a little wooden stake with a warning, but a full-sized, carved and painted, impossible-to-miss declaration. I dragged an old barn door out of storage, painted it bright red, and added bold letters across the top. "Private property. Trespassers will be stampeded." Below that, I painted a cartoon of Mabel mid-charge, steam coming out of her nostrils and a flower crown flying off her head. It was dramatic, maybe even excessive, but that was the point. I bolted it to 2 fence posts and stuck it right at the main entrance to the pasture. Anyone thinking about turning my land into their next glamping fantasy would have second thought. As a final touch, I built a scarecrow. Not for birds, but for poetic justice. I dressed it in a glittery shawl, plastic sunglasses, and a floppy sun hat. I named her Karen. She stood tall next to the warning sign, forever waving her clipboard in silent protest. Over the next few weeks, the farm got back to normal. The cows did what cows do. I fixed the fence posts that had been knocked loose. Duke resumed his squirrel surveillance. And June started selling t-shirts that read, "Stampede first, ask questions never," which somehow became a hit at the county store. What stuck with me most, though, was how many people told me the story meant something to them. Neighbors I barely knew dropped off baked goods and chuckled about the footage they'd watched online. Parents said their kids were pretending to be cows and recreating the Great Charge with pool noodles. Even the sheriff's wife stopped by to say it was the first time she'd seen her husband laugh that hard in years. It was a weird legacy, sure. I hadn't planned to become the accidental symbol of property rights and rural boundaries. But I'd take it. Because if there was one lesson worth spreading, it was this: respect goes both ways. You can't build community on stolen space. You can't force your rules onto someone else's soil. And you definitely, absolutely, under no circumstances, mess with a man's cows. As the last of the summer faded into fall, I sat back one evening and watched the sky turn shades of orange and purple over the pasture. Mabel was lying near the fence, chewing contentedly. Buttercup dozed beside her. The scarecrow stood its eternal vigil, and the sign caught the last light of the setting sun, casting a long, sharp shadow across the field. Peace had returned to the farm. But just in case, the cows were ready.